to the ExecMBA podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to feature a conversation I recently recorded with my career colleagues, Jim Collins and Sarita Soldz. On an interesting historical note, this is the first conversation we've ever featured with both Jim and Sarita in the room. Of course, for those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that Jim and Sarita have been on the podcast many times, but we recently sat down to talk a little bit more about the career search from start to end and how they encourage students to think about each step along the way. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Jim Collins and Sarita Soldz. Jim, Sarita, welcome back to the podcast.
Wow, good to be here, Brett.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting both of us.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
So you've both been on the podcast individually. We've had many great career conversations with you by yourselves. This is the first time the two of you have been here on the podcast together. Podcast history happening. This is exciting for me, I'm sure for our listeners, hopefully for you as well.
I'm thrilled.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So good to be here.
Yeah, very much looking forward to this.
So this is a conversation sort of inspired by the idea of new year, new you. Some of our listeners may have come off the holidays and new year, started thinking about, okay, here's what I'm doing right now, but is it what I want to be doing? And I'm starting to think about maybe education as a way of taking the next step of in my career. But, really, how do I get started on this sort of career investigation? How do I figure out what it is I might like to do? How do I reality test some of those ideas? And you're the experts on these sorts of things. You work with our students all the time on these kind of questions. And wanted to have you come on the podcast to talk about some of the strategies you use to help students kind of hone in on some of these things. So abstract topic, obviously, it's a big topic. We could be here for hours talking about this. But what we're trying to do is give students, our listeners, some concrete steps that they can really take from this conversation to sort of move forward with. So with that said, how do people get started with this process of thinking about what they might like to do?
So what we like to do with our executive MBA students is we really emphasize this whole idea of becoming self-aware. And it really is, really understanding about yourself. So some of the things that we really recommend that you do is to think about some self-assessments. One of the ones that we use here is called Career Leader, and that can help you understand a little bit more about what your motivations are, what your interests are, and it even ends up giving you a little bit of a career match that then we can have conversations around how some of these things might be a good fit for you.
So obviously, we give our students access to these kind of assessments. But if I'm out there in the world, where do I find Career Leader or any of the other sort of personal assessments? Where can I go? Do I just go to careerleader.com or,
Yeah, you can go there. There's a number of them. And I am sure that many of you listening might have done some things like Myers-Briggs. You might have done something called the Berkman. There's Hogan assessments. There's different, all sorts of, there's Strengths Finders. And then there's also a lot of resources regarding books that you might be interested in reading about. So we use a lot of design thinking methodology. So there's a book there's a book called Designing Your Life, which is a really nice process of thinking about how you might prototype your way into what you like to do by testing and learning. And then we also use a book called from Dory Clark. I'm blanking out on the name of it.
And Reinventing You.
Yes, Reinventing You. So those kind of, and then the other one that is pretty interesting is called Finding Your Why by Simon Sinek. So really any of those kind of books or assessments, it's not like there's one that's the right answer, but any of them can be helpful. And then as you do take maybe a couple of them and the other ideas, you might also want to consider journaling. Kind of just reflecting, like, what do I like in my current job? What do I dislike? And then as you start to take some of these assessments, then you can think about what are the themes. So, what do I really enjoy doing? What's the impact that I want to have? What are my strengths? And then we can have discussions around how you might think about different careers based on just becoming more self-aware.
It's so interesting that you start with the introspection, because I think oftentimes for people, when you think about, all right, I need to do something else, the tendency is just to like charge out there and start looking on LinkedIn or, any of these places where you find jobs and just start applying for stuff. But what I'm hearing you say is first spend some time investigating you. Jim, as you think about that as a backdrop for this next step, why do you see that as so valuable for students?
The variety of career options, the pathways that you might go, they're virtually limitless. In terms of the functions, the industries, the levels, and so forth that you could go, and it's very easy to get lost in that process. We work with tons of students every year who are trying to gain some sense of what's my purpose, what is my true direction, and what really speaks to my soul, if you will, about where I fit and the kind of work that I really want to do. That developing that sense of who you are fundamentally as a professional and the general direction. It doesn't have to be specific, certainly for your exploration, but the general direction which you want to head is, I like to use the term, it's a star that really helps you chart your course. It guides you through the very uncertain process of career transition.
And you do a lot with students, obviously, even before they matriculate here. I want to do a quick plug as we continue this conversation about the career kickoff meetings. Obviously, there's the professional advancement course up front. We've talked about some of these things on the podcast, but people come to this program. That support starts very early. That investigation starts very early. So somebody does some research. They assess themselves. They're thinking, okay, these are the themes that I really want to sort of have in my career. We've got this information. Where do they go next?
Yeah, so one of the things that we highly encourage that students do is to get out there and learn from others. So part of that would be, for example, informational interviewing. So the idea is that go prototype some aspect of maybe what the path that you're thinking that you want to do, and learn more about it. So go talk to somebody who's doing it. Maybe you go volunteer in an organization that you might get some exposure to it. Maybe you raise your hand at your current work for a special project. Maybe you join LinkedIn groups that are, known regarding the area that you're interested in. There's just a multitude of different ways that you can, quote unquote, prototype or test drive what you're interested in doing. And as you test drive, then that idea of reflecting back and saying, do I like what I hear or not? Is this a direction I want to go? And then that can kind of inform you as to, do I need to pivot? Do I want to look at plan B? Maybe my plan A wasn't exactly what I wanted to go do. So one of the foundational elements is really getting out there, test driving through informational interviewing.
So, Jim, you're someone that's worked very closely with our alumni mentoring program that exists here, and we talk a lot about the Darden Alumni Network for our matriculated students. But this conversation is for people who are out there in the world thinking about making a potential career transition, aren't yet at Darden. And so how do you help people think just generally about networks that may be available to them? Where to get started with these kind of informational conversations?
Well, great. Thanks, Brett. I mean, to Sarita's point, it starts with clarity about, at least a general clarity or initial clarity about the functional areas that you might be aligned with and the potential industries in which you're interested in exploring. With that clarity, then, you go to your networks, and those networks are everywhere for you. Sarita mentioned a couple. There's groups on LinkedIn, so you can join them. But, if you're coming from the military, for example, you have very robust military networks and the veterans and the active duty people. If you are part of a professional group, you're a project manager or you're a physician or what have you, you belong to some sort of professional society. Tremendous resources there to, connections you can reach out to conduct informational interviews and just to ask them about the kinds of things that they're doing. Like what's a week in the life of a finance exec look like, or a investment banker, or a product manager within technology? What's it like to work within this industry? Because I'm thinking of moving from financial services to consumer packaged goods. And I'm really interested in knowing more about not just that, but also what Johnson & Johnson is doing. In addition, you have your family, your friends, they know people as well. Depending upon what corporation you might be working with, you have business partners and associates that may also be a great starting point for you. The list is literally endless. All it requires is just some creative thinking and maybe identifying 2 or 3 people to get started with, because they in turn will refer you to other folks.
I think about one of our former colleagues used to describe this process as just being curious about what people do. Yeah. And networking is one of these intimidating words. Maybe you encounter this with some of our students. I remember from talking with law students back in the day before I came to Darden, networking was a scary sort of abstract thing. It feels transactional to people, right? It sort of has this negative connotation to it. But our former colleague called it sort of getting curious and just asking people to tell you their story and talk about themselves. To me, I think that's one of the best ways to think about it, because particularly in this informational networking space, this is really what you're doing. Is that how you encourage students to think about it, Sarita?
Yeah, and so we do hear from a number of students who they think, wow, they're going to give me their time. I don't want to take up their time. And what we really encourage them to do is to think about I love the idea of being curious. And it's also simply about asking somebody for their thoughts and advice. And you will learn and you will find out if someone is not interested, you just won't hear back from them. It's not a big deal. Most of the time, people want to tell you about themselves, tell you about what they've learned throughout their career, and really kind of pay it forward and help others. So you will be amazed at how many people you will reach out to, and they will respond and want to share with you what they've learned.
And that sort of connectivity that happens through that, Jim, as you mentioned, you start with 2 or 3 people, which gives you probably a list of another 2 or 3 people per person, and it sort of compounds from there. So you start with those 2 or 3 people. Maybe you find plan A wasn't exactly what you had in mind, and so now you're back at the drawing board. You obviously talk to students who go through this process, as they reality test and prototype. So I'm back at the drawing board. What are some action items that you might share with a student at that point as they kind of take stock of things and think about how to go forward? Is it the same process all over again, essentially, Jim?
Well, at each step along the way, after every interview, it advises you on what the next step is. So that's yet to be determined, and it can go in a number of different directions. From my perspective, as far as figuring out what the next step is, it becomes immediately apparent, or very quickly apparent after you conclude your last networking interview. Where do you need to go from here? What have you learned? I'd like to talk a little bit about the resistance in networking that Sarita was mentioning too. I experienced people having basically 3 or so sources of resistance. Some are just introverted and naturally shy, and it's not energizing for them to reach out to other people. Others feel like they are somehow not sanctioned to be asking other people for assistance. And as Sarita mentioned, other folks feel like you're kind of using the person because you're asking for something for yourself, like what's the value proposition I'm getting back? And if I didn't really know this person and I didn't want something from them, I probably would not be having any reason to have any conversation with them. So I feel a little shady about this, But again, to Sarita's point, people enjoy giving thoughts and advice on your job search. And your reluctance to network is depriving them of that pleasure. So I encourage people to get out there, not be selfish, get out there and start making connections.
No, that's great advice. I mean, everybody has been, I think most people at this point in their career, where our students are, have been asked by someone to help with this kind of conversation. Reached out, a friend of a friend or a colleague, hey, you got 30 minutes, can I buy you a cup of coffee? So what it's like from the other end, and most people don't feel obligated or burdened by that. And so I always think it's good to remember that. So we've gone through this investigation phase, sort of thought about it, self-reflection. Now we've gone through the informational networking phase. I'm curious about what comes next after you've prototyped a little bit, you've gathered this information, you feel good about where you are. What comes next for people?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is I've got my plan A. Let's say I know I want to go into management consulting, okay? So it's funny, I just was meeting with a student today, to your point earlier, Brett, who said, hey, I went down these other 2 paths, and I'm realizing they aren't really what I wanted to go do. I am now taking all of these strategy classes. I am enjoying it so much. And I think this consulting area is how I want to go. So what we were talking about just today was to think about, in essence, you are still doing informational interviewing, but you're doing it in a little bit of a different way. So what we were talking about earlier is more about exploring. So asking for thoughts and advice about somebody's industry and learning more about what the job is on a day-to-day basis. When here your goal would be is, I am trying to get closest to the hiring manager as I can at the companies that I'm really interested in working for. So I might go about the process in the same way, but my goal becomes a little bit different because I've decided on what my plan A is. I want to go into consulting, and now I'm going to try and go talk to some of my fellow students. Usually we say, hey, talk to your fellow students, because there's a huge network within the Darden community to at least then learn about the differences between the different companies. And then if you've decided you want to go pursue one, then start doing more of those meetings where you get referred to the hiring manager. So in essence, your application can get to the top of the list, as opposed to being stuck somewhere in the pile and not really found out about. So getting interviews really would be kind of that next phase. Now, what I didn't talk about, though, and maybe I will pass it over to Jim to do this, is to talk about, okay, I've now pivoted. I might go into a different career path. I might need to think about, what am I emphasizing about me, my story, my resume, what's on my LinkedIn profile, to make sure that all of my materials and the way I represent me as my brand kind of convince you that my value proposition would make sense for this different career path. So I would say, too, that you'd want to reassess some of the marketing materials that you've probably already pulled together. So, Jim, do you want to maybe cover some of the...
Yeah, sure. I just want to build on what you were saying, Sarita, which is, we think that depending upon the significance of the career transition that people are undertaking, it really does move through a series of phases. The first phase perhaps is just that high-level exploration to define potential functions that I, as a individual, may want to move towards, and industries where I want to do that, where I want to practice those functions. The second phase in the process would be, clarity will emerge from phase one. Specific functions and specific industries will become apparent. And once that happens, you then begin a more focused exploration in phase two to drill down into those industries, to better understand them, to understand the roles, how your skills translate, and what does that transition process look like? What are the stepping stones? You reality test it. How realistic is it? And what are the doorways? And what are the skill gaps that I might need to fill if I really want to be considered a candidate of choice? And then the final phase, of course, is the Sarita referred to, which is the focused job search, where you're getting known beyond your piece of paper within target organizations, getting known by the hiring manager, which he said, and trying to engineer that transition, be a candidate of choice. So those are the phases we go through. As I think about the fundamental technology, if you will, the fundamental focus we're talking about is one of informational interviewing. And, at each stage of those phases, the topic areas, the focus of the informational interview will be different. At the first phase, you're asking very broad, high-level questions. Tell me about this industry, tell me about this function. At the second phase, you're asking far more specific questions to get a fuller sense of the industry and how you might transition to it, the gaps that you might fill, and so forth. And in the final phase, where you're doing a concentrated job search, a focused job search, you're asking questions about thoughts and advice on that job search. To Sarita's point, people love giving thoughts and advice. It's free. It's a feel-good experience. You're asking to be connected to other people as well, and referred appropriately. And once again, to Sarita's point, you need to have, at that stage, a pretty clear sense of who you are, your value proposition, the brand that you're selling, and pretty good marketing materials.
And for those listening who may be sort of wondering what marketing materials include, I'm guessing you're meaning resume, cover letter, LinkedIn profile. Is that right, Sarita?
Yep. So we really start with making sure that you understand who's your target. So that would be what type of company, industry, functional role, to Jim's point. And then what are your skills and interests, and learning what those needs are in the marketplace so that you can then create the target that really needs what you have. And we do encourage you also to think about what is your value proposition when you think about your brand. So what real world problems do you solve? What skills approach do you use to solve it? What impact does it have on your target? What makes your strategy and approach unique? So that then when you're talking to, let's say you're in that phase of working on getting interviews, you're able to really tell your story in a very compelling way that would include who you are, your strengths, why, what's your impact, and really why they would be interested, in essence, in hiring you. So, those, to your point, those are all parts of the piece to even get to then building the resume, the LinkedIn profile, making sure you have a strong cover letter, all of those branding pieces so that you are really sharing, really, in essence, meeting a market need and explaining how you fill the market need.
That is very interesting what you just described there, because in many ways, that's sort of telling your story. You probably need a few people to kind of check you on that through the process, right? You all do a great job working with the current students on resume and cover letter. I'm thinking about somebody sitting at home listening to this who is not yet a current Darden student. And where do they start? Do they spouse, partner, significant other, friends, family? Who would you recommend that they would work with on these sorts of, I'm trying to get my story right. I'm trying to get my brand to where it needs to be, where it makes sense for the jobs. Jim, where do you encourage people to start?
Well, first of all, I want to say that brand, that story is a constantly evolving one. It's not like you set it and forget it. So throughout this career exploration process, the phases that you move through, your story will be evolving. I think the important part, at least in the early stages, is that you are able to give the individual enough clarity about just three things. Here's the general functional area, not specific, but general. Am I a general management guy? Am I a strategy person? Do I really enjoy product management, project management? Am I really a finance professional, and so forth? You want to have some clarity about your core areas of expertise. So if you're a project manager, maybe, or a program manager, maybe your key areas of expertise are ones of building the teams are going to execute on the strategy, step that down into action plans and programmatic solutions that are going to deliver the goods on time and ahead of schedule or on budget, high quality. And as part of that, you're also sharing a statement about the kind of difference that you like to make. What is the impact that's important to you, that energizes you? That can be shared in 15, 20 seconds. And that gives the listener enough clarity about who you are that they can advise you and refer you appropriately. So the places you go for that, well, you can certainly begin testing that with your networking connections and the informational interviews. It is very fair to be asking those kinds of fundamental questions. It's like, here's the kind of skill sets that I think that I have. Here's how I think about package this in a professional brand for myself. What are your thoughts and advice on that? Now, the more the person knows you, the better they're able to give you a good perspective on that. So it could be talking to former mentors, bosses, certainly business partners, peers within your organization. Those are great places. Once again, as I said, if you're part of a professional network, to reach out and connect with those individuals. If you're applying to Darden, give Sarita and I a call. We work with folks all the time on helping to define those things at all stages and all phases of that transition process.
So interesting to hear you describe these processes, because as abstract as they seem, they're real phases and steps that people follow. So they're really not as abstract as it seems. And I also am visualizing in my mind as you're describing this sort of like funnel thing. So it starts very wide to narrow, wide to narrow. So you start in the first phase, it moves that way. The second phase, it moves that way. And the hiring manager thing is interesting because I'm trying to think about, is that you're working through your existing personal networks to get to that hiring manager, or are you on LinkedIn reaching out to that person? How do those conversations generally go if it's just like a LinkedIn outreach? Hey, I'm looking at X company. I see you work there as the hiring manager. Do people typically respond to that kind of outreach, or do you need that warm introduction of a employee within the company? Sarita, what's been your experience with that?
So in terms of maybe how you might think about prioritizing the folks that you reach out to, the folks that you know the best, that are closest to you, you are more likely to have a stronger response rate. But that does, what I will tell you is, the people you think who are going to respond may not, and the people you don't think who are going to respond do. So there really doesn't necessarily be a rhyme or reason to it. But when we do think about prioritizing, we say, hey, who is within your personal network that you already know, to your point, Brett? And then who might be that next layer, which might mean, hey, what was your undergraduate network, so that you have something in common that you can kind of reference when you're reaching out, so that the person would be interested in connecting with you. So generally speaking, then, it just kind of works its way down. We recommend that you try to stay in that, the warmer kind of connection. What I will tell you, too, is that the Darden network of alumni, not only alumni, but also of your fellow students, is probably one of the most powerful alumni networks that I've been and seen. And what we hear from students is the response rate is extremely high. So our alumni are very active and they want to support the students here. So that would probably be like the third step. So if I were to prioritize, it'd be your personal network, then say, hey, the folks that are maybe around you that you might know, like your fellow students. It might be the alumni from your school. And then you could sort of look at, hey, who's in your industry, conferences, the folks you know that way. And then we say, okay, there are methods and ways to leverage LinkedIn to kind of expand it to, let's say I just am not seeing anyone in the specific thing I want to do, and I need to go find them. So there are ways to make and use LinkedIn to help you. And I'll just give you one tip. That one tip is, if you join a group of interest, then you can message anybody within that group. You do not have to be connected with them to message them. So that is one of the easier ways to get in touch with really just about anybody in the area of interest that you are looking to move into.
And as we're having this conversation, Jim, I'm reminded of 2 sessions you did earlier this year, 2 webinars for prospective students that are both out there on our blog. One is about utilizing LinkedIn. I think it's LinkedIn Profiles with Pizzazz was your title. Always exciting to use Pizzazz on anything. So, for folks who are like, gosh, I haven't really used LinkedIn at all, I'm trying to figure out how to get started with my profile, highly recommend that session. And then you also talked about informational networking, and there was a great example in your presentation of a message you might send to someone on LinkedIn or via email. Just, an initial email introduction saying, this is who I am. This is why I'm contacting you. Would you have some time to talk? So those are 2 really great resources that are generally out there. So with this in mind, so you're at this point, you've applied for, you found the hiring manager, you sort of got into that that tactical phase, and you're applying. And let's say you get the job.
Oh my God!
Oh my gosh!
What do I do now?
So you've gotten the job, and maybe you have a few jobs that you're considering. Yeah. I know you work with students on this too, and this is one of the. So we always tell people, the career team, soup to nuts here. As you are getting started and just trying to figure out what it is that you actually want to do, you're there. And as they're considering offers and negotiating, you're there. But if I'm out in the world, how do I figure out whether this is a good offer or a not not so good offer, or whether this offer could be better, how do you encourage people to think about negotiating, how much to ask for? To me, this is a little bit of a dark art. I don't know enough about this. I'm learning things here too. So let's start with you, Sarita. Jim, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, so before we even get to the part about negotiating, so what we like to talk about is your fit. So is the job a good fit for you? So as you're assessing your current job, as well as, do I stay in my current job or do I leave? There are really 3 key things to think about. Number 1, am I passionate about the business, the direction in which this organization plays? And so does it set my passions free? Number 2 is, does it leverage my strengths? So this is where, as you think about what we've talked about today, which is getting to know yourself, being self-aware, you've already done this self-assessment. Maybe you've taken strengths finders and you know the strengths that you have. But not only that, you know the strengths that you like to use on the job. I could be very good at speaking in front of the public, but maybe I really enjoy speaking one-on-one. So what I'd rather do then is maybe I want to go be a researcher rather than a presenter all the time. I'm just making this up as I go. And so that's the second part of what I would call the fit triangle. The third part then is really around the idea of the people who you're going to work with. Are they inspiring to you? Do you want to be around them? Would you want to go grab a beer with them? Could you spend a day in a car with them driving somewhere? And if you say, yes, these are my people, then that would be a really good fit regarding the people side. So it's passion, it's strengths, and it's people. And we are always talking to students about how does this fit work for you where you are, what's missing, and then think about that next job as to how does it make the fit better. So I would say do that first, and then think about what you want to do regarding the negotiation.
All right, Jim. I've got this offer. I've done that assessment. I feel pretty good about the people.
All right.
I am passionate about the work, and I think it aligns with my strengths. What next? They made this offer to me. It's X salary. Sure. It's got these benefits. How do I think about this?
Well, first of all, I want to say you don't negotiate just for the sake of negotiating. You negotiate it if you really, it's what are the gaps? And what I typically suggest to people as they're responding to an offer is, first, make a list of all the wonderful things about this opportunity. Sarita just walked you through the fit model. The passion, the skill, utilize my skill sets. I love the people. They feel like my kind of folks. And there may be a number of other really positive attributes that really appeal to you. Articulate those, because you want to lead with those in the response to the offer. But secondly, where are the gaps, and exactly what might they be? I mean, it could be a compensation issue. It could be a work-life balance issue. It could be a relocation issue. I mean, there's a multiplicity of things, of course, to you might want to negotiate. But having great clarity about that is the second point. I think the third is in how you approach the offer. You lead off the response. You lead off with here's all the wonderful things. But here are a couple things that I wanted to discuss with you. And I think the way you position it it's a collaborative dialogue. You want to get off to the right foot with your hiring manager. You want to use this as a way of modeling having a difficult conversation. And the way I would pose it is, this is what you offered. Very grateful for that. But the things that I was hoping to receive, whether it's a compensation or a bonus or getting a car or perhaps relocation, what have you, is X. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what the thinking was behind the compensation offer. So they know what you're looking for, they know what the gap is, and they can share that. And then who knows where the conversation goes after that. But the focus is that you want to reach some sort of win-win situation between you and the employer. And for starters, and I think you also need to build a business case for your expectations. If you're looking for greater compensation, well, what's the business case for that? What justifies that? Not just the fact. I mean, the fact that you want more money. Well, that's nice, but I, as the hiring manager, am not inspired by that. What's the value proposition you're bringing to me that would make me want to think that perhaps I'm undervaluing you?
So much of this, sometimes the salary piece, people, it's like Glassdoor. Where do you start with all this? Sarita, I know you do a ton with negotiations here. So building off of what Jim just shared, you probably have a few ideas as to maybe how people kind of do this market research.
Yeah, I would agree on what Jim said, which is you really want to make it and think about it as as really how you can help the employer. So to your point about making it win-win. The number one question that always students ask when they're negotiating is, how do I know what I'm worth? Yeah. What's my value? So I would say that is the number one first thing that you want to think about when you're going to negotiate. So to do that, you've got to do some research. To your point, Brett, you can go to Glassdoor. Probably the most easiest thing now, because of all the data that's on the internet, is just to type in a title that's similar to what you're looking at, salary, and chances are Google will pop up with the salary range for you. You can then look at a cost of living calculator. There's a great one at CNN, cost of living. You can Google that, and it'll give you even some differences between whether you're going to accept a job, say, in Washington, D.C., or, for example, Lexington, Kentucky, which is a smaller market. So so I would say number one is to know your value, because then you have an idea of what is reasonable to ask for in the negotiation that would make sense. And there is a lot of times this might come up in a screening interview. The employer is going to want to know, are you going to be within the range that's acceptable right up front before we even continue into the interview process and then kind of get to the negotiation of it. So one of the best ways to talk about it is to talk about this idea of a range, because you know your value, and then you can ask them, what is it that you have budgeted for the position? So that you can even continue to get more information. I can't really stress enough this idea of knowing what you're worth. And so many times people are afraid to go find that out. You can also learn this by talking with your peers, and specifically if you know them well, or if you have group of friends who are working in the same area, go talk with them. And you don't have to say, can you tell me your exact salary? You can say, hey, what is the range? Is it like 125? Is it 150? Is it 175? Is it 200? Is it 250? I mean, whatever range is appropriate for what you're asking. And usually you can get folks to also talk about it so that you really have a good idea before you go in what might be reasonable.
Jim, I was so struck by what you said. Don't just negotiate to negotiate. I think some people tell you, like, you always have to negotiate. Everybody negotiates. It seemed that what you were suggesting was that it's all about being in good faith, and that you're trying to, be fair about this and to build a business case. And you don't just do it to do it. You do it if there's actual meaning behind it. Yeah,
well, to that point, Brett, if I was a candidate and I had an inkling that the organization was gaming me just to get me at the lowest possible rate they could, I would find that pretty distasteful. And it would make me give serious thought to rethinking my decision to join the organization. It would be saying something about the culture. And conversely, I, as a hiring manager, if I get a sense that this employee is just trying to cut the very best deal for themselves, they don't have the larger organization's interest at heart, this is really not a collaborative discussion where they're trying to have a win-win solution, well, that's going to leave a bad taste in my mouth, and I may be rethinking my decision to make an offer to them. So yeah, it does have to be in good faith, and it can be a tough thing for the candidate because you have to wear two hats. You have to have your self-interest hat on, but you also have to have the interests of the larger organization, and certainly want to support the hiring manager and meet their needs. But you're there to kind of I think jointly make sense of how do we value this position, how do we value me, the candidate, in the context of it.
Sarita, I want to put in a quick plug for some of your upcoming webinars. One is on negotiations for women, and I know you've done some programming around that, and I want to sort of talk a little bit about that as well as the prototyping that we talked about here today. We're going to do in late February a Design Your Life webinar with some of that idea sort of baked into it. But before we sort of get to that, let's talk just a little bit more about negotiations. Is there any final tips or words of advice that you might have for people as they approach this process?
Yeah, so as you think about whether you're going to negotiate, and I will tell you, it is like 99 out of 100 students who probably do negotiate on their offer, is what I found, does start with knowing your value and knowing what the value of that position is. And that gives you an idea of whether you want to negotiate or not, to Jim's point. So I also wanted to reframe the negotiation in a way that might make you think about it differently, which is a negotiation actually helps the relationship that you will have with the organization and the hiring manager. Particularly if you do the negotiation in a way, as Jim mentioned, supports what is important for the organization and how you will help solve their problems. So they will want to give you a salary that is appropriate, just as you would want to have a salary that's appropriate. If there isn't a good fit there, then chances are you will probably not stay with the organization, and the organization does not want that. So chances are you probably will negotiate, and if you think about it as it improves the relationship with your manager, because it gives you a chance to have more conversation and for them to really get to know what's important to you and for you to talk about what's important to them, then maybe that will help you think about how to do the negotiation. So to your second point, yes, we in the past have done a negotiation workshop. We've done a couple of them, and we've and the negotiations for women, if you really want to know, is really good for anybody. It's not really just for women. We've just sort of set that up because what we have found is that women negotiate just as much as men, but what they tend to get is less. So let's just help in any way we can to sort of help maybe even the playing field as much as possible. And to your second point regarding the designing the life design work that we're doing, about a year ago, we did a one-day life design retreat across 3 different years of executive MBAs. And we really used this idea of learning about yourself, doing a lot of self-reflection. We worked on a work view, life view. What are your values? I think Jim mentioned earlier, what is that North Star that can really be the guiding post as you even go through all of trying to figure out all of this career work. And then go play with some of the things that you might do in the terms of the prototyping and everything. So we do an all-day workshop, and we invite students in. And one of the best things about it is the students come out and say, that is like the best workshop that I've ever been to. So we're looking forward to delivering that, I think, in May coming up. Well,
exciting times. I think this has been super helpful. I mean, basically, this is the roadmap for how you make a career transition, what we've talked about here today. Whether you're a Darden student, obviously tremendous resources here. You're a Darden student that get to work with you, all the programming that you do, all the relationships you can facilitate. Of course, all the marketing material help you offer, feedback about resume, cover letter, in addition to LinkedIn profile, and of course, the negotiations process. But even if someone's not here, they can listen to this and say, these are the steps that I follow. And that was the goal for our podcast. So I think not only was this a historic podcast, we accomplished a lot. Not too bad for a snowy Saturday here in Roslyn. I want to note that we are here on a weekend residency. This has been a particularly exciting weekend. Yesterday, the Carfax CEO was here. It's so fun having all the 2021s here, both sections here in Roslyn now. Real energy. We're going bowling tonight. Lots going on. So, Jim, Sarita, I know these are full weekends for you, lots of student meetings, but so appreciative of your taking time out for the podcast.
Oh, always delighted to do it, Brett.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, and thank you, Jim.
Oh, thank you, Sarita. Good work with you, as always.
And that was my interview with Jim Collins and Sarita Soldz, two of the career advisors with our Career Development Center who support our executive format students. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at exec, that's ExecMBA, at darden.virginia.edu. And until next time, thanks for listening.